Hi everyone, Real Conversations with Kerri Marie here. Today's topic is about how your story can give goosebumps. I know what you're saying. Some of you out there are probably thinking, I don't have a good story that can give goosebumps. How is that even possible? Well, quite frankly, you'd be surprised. Once I started opening up about my story, it actually started occurring a lot more frequently. And it's not that I'm bragging, it's not that I'm definitely no exaggerations. If anything, I can only fit a summary of my story in the time of conversation. But the impact, depending on how you are overcoming those things or how you're succeeding on the other end of that and what you're doing with your story, that's, I think, what really gives people goosebumps. So, quite frankly, why should my story give goosebumps? Well, I'm not going into story time here about my history and my past, but wrap it up in a nutshell. A lot of my story has to do with medical health conditions and the struggles through that, the dynamics. I've survived cancer twice. I also had a period of time where I had multiple seizures, about 20 seizures a day for about 2 years, and lost the ability to walk and talk during that time. Also, in turn, I had lost the ability to absorb nutrients for a good portion of that time, and the doctor said that they needed to send me from one side of the country to the next because, quite frankly, they didn't have the tools. They couldn't understand how to stop the progression of what was going on. And if I continued to lose weight and not absorb nutrients, essentially they give me a limited amount of time to live and survive this thing. And so that really was a huge changing point in my journey, my story. Before that, I just suffered. I just went through life thinking life happened to me, quite frankly. And with this progression, it felt like things were changing in me. And I didn't realize at the time, but my voice was starting to come out. It was starting to grow. And why? Because I know what it's like to be in that position. Feel like you don't have a voice. Feel like you're stuck. Feel like you have so much to say and you're not able to say it. And I want to encourage people to find their voice because there's a light inside of you that can benefit other people, and it's amazing how it can heal yourself in the process of being open and expressing of that. So, in a nutshell, in the process of some seizures I had an interesting situation that happened to me. It never happened before. I had somebody pray for healing for me. Actually, a group of people pray for healing for me. I felt an amazing sensation during that time, and that was the last day of my full body seizures. Now, that didn't mean I didn't have any more medical struggles. It seemed like it took several years to start rehabilitating my body to think, function, and work properly again, teaching it how to absorb nutrients again, which still is not something I fully understand. But that's just it. It's always a constant process forward. Every step, positive step in the direction of your goals is a success. And that, I think, is the overall arching premise to my story, is that in light of all odds, this is how I'm succeeding. And through that, I express that story to people and tell them about that just in a nutshell. And they're just like, wow. And they're like, that gave me goosebumps, And I actually hear this quite often. And so I started to think about, well, why is that? Why is it that when I tell my story, it gives people goosebumps? To me, this is a regular part of my life. I mean, it doesn't seem special. If anything, it seems almost like a sad satire story or something, It's like, and I think there's a part of me that, back in the day would have thought poor me, to a degree. I mean, not sulking in it, but just like, why is this all happening to me? And I think most people, that's a natural response in dealing with extreme hardships, especially back to back. Well, there became a point where I think that I remembered it starting in the midst of some of my seizures, and when it would impact my ability to speak, I was like a prisoner inside my own body. I was there, I wasn't functioning physically the way that I should, and it was frustrating. I couldn't communicate what I needed or what was or wasn't good for me. Couldn't communicate to people that I was okay, I was here. I did suffer some brain damage during the process. Apparently, whenever you have that many kind of seizures, it's inevitable. And there are some things to this day that I cannot do the same way that I did prior to that. So there was a huge part of me that changed. But in this process, this is, I had memory problems, so I started doing photography again to capture all of the moments, because to me, every moment mattered. I didn't want to lose the memories. I wanted them there. And if I lost them, I wanted to preserve those memories. And it was, it was something I could do even in the midst of moments where it was a little harder to speak or hard to move. I could still do that. And then that kind of progressed and grew into this great sympathy for people who go through extreme hardships. Honestly, whatever aspect it is they're going through, because there's a lot more to my story that really impacts and drives this. I'll go into that in another segment a little deeper, but today's purpose is just to normalize the human condition and help you realize that being a human being is messy. It's messy. It is not perfect. It is full of ups and downs, and we hear that commonly. We hear that on the surface, that nobody's perfect. Okay, well, what does that look like? How do you go onto the other side of that? Nobody's perfect. Like, how do you take this nobody's perfect and turn it into something that is in its imperfection powerful and impacting to people? And this is why I believe that your story, as much as mine, can give people goosebumps. It's a story of impact. And really, honestly, we all have a voice. So I am in the mindset now that ever since I started my recovery process and learning about my health and managing my health so that I can be stable, because quite frankly, I'm not going to be able to change. Some of it's genetic, some of it's developmental, and now some of it's injury based. It's all colliding together to this one thing. So I was told I'd never finish college. I went back and got my degree one class at a time, and, because I wanted to prove to myself that this wasn't the end. This wasn't all there was. I think that there's a big driver behind me in realizing, I've always rooted for the underdog. And so in this time in my life, I was rooting for myself. And I think that we don't learn how to do that as much as a culture, how to root for other people and root for ourselves. I think we're all struggling to just do the day-to-day what we think is expected of us. And that's perfectly fine. It's just, why don't we examine the self-sustainability of this? This doesn't mean laziness. If anything, this journey is hard. You have to put in a lot of hours of research, learning, education, and practice. And quite frankly, it is so worth it, because the alternative was not worth it. So I now try to take whatever it is that God gives me, and I try to invest it into making a difference in life. So in the parable of the good steward, you've got three different stewards. The one steward that, made a little something, the other one that really profoundly took that income the master gave him and made it even more than what it was. And then you've got this bad steward that just buried it because he was afraid of the master if he lost it. And I was definitely that person prior to some of my health issues. And really, I think that because it was almost like that God had to show me through all these steps, all these progressions, that what does it mean to be a good steward? Because I didn't feel like I had been given a sack of change to hold on to and invest in the stock market or invest in businesses or anything like that. So God really had to reshape my brain into understanding what currency I personally have been given to invest into, to multiply. And For me, I've discovered that through my weaknesses, I can allow God to show his strength. I can encourage people through my weakness by the very act of how I respond in the midst of a struggle, in the midst of pain, and I do have pain every day. That's part of my genetic situation. So I experience these adversities. I've had to learn how to be grateful and appreciative in the midst of my suffering. And through that experience and through that example, I'm able to lead other people into showing them what it can be like. In the worst of times, like there's an alternative option to what our natural instincts are in the process of struggling or trials or, whatever you want to call it. And really, this is how I start to see that hardships can actually become a very powerful tool. I think that, for example, you take a butterfly, okay? It's a caterpillar at first. It's crawling around on its belly, on its little legs, and it's, going from limb to leaf, eating, and it only knows that life. That's okay for the caterpillar at that time because that's all it knows. But then it comes to a time in its life where it becomes, it creates this chrysalis. And for those of you that don't know, in this chrysalis, this caterpillar is literally on a molecular level ripped to pieces, completely changed to mush, and reassembled and reformed as a butterfly. And even though that butterfly first emerges from that chrysalis and it's never flown before, there's a part of it that's been innately changed and given the tools that it needs to be able to fly. And so it trusts that it can fly, and it starts to take its unsteady flight, and then it flies. And then it lives its life as a butterfly. And I think that when you go through trials in life, hardships, adversity, that's what it's like. There's, I don't think I've ever met a single person who's gone through any significant trials is the same when they're on the other side of that trial. And and that's just it, is you got to recognize that your trials are an investment. They're powerful. They're a powerful tool. You can use what you've learned from it to invest in your future and making a difference. So that gets to my other point, honesty. Okay, I think that we have gotten into this culture of, when we say, hey, how's it going? How you doing? And no, I'm fine. Because we think that it's okay to hide what's going on with us. Because we think it's society standards say, I don't really want to hear this. And there really is some truth to that. But you can learn to read the room, to identify when being honest about your situation, your story. And I don't mean being a negative person. Like, okay, you don't want to be like, oh, poor me, here's all my problems, and going on and on and on about that. That's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is, yeah, you know what? I had a broken leg last month, and it was a little tough to heal from, but now I'm learning to recover. I'm getting back on my feet again, and this is what I'm starting to get looking forward to. So it's a very positive thinking based mentality. It's learning how to take what happens in your life, what you go through, and turn it into something that can be valuable currency. And that's not just valuable to the person that's receiving the information or hearing your story, but it's every time you speak it, every time you think about it that way, it resonates within you in such a way that is encouraging to yourself as much as it is to the other person. So you are, instead of, I like to think of negative stuff as like you're taking away, right? But when you're positive, you're adding, you're investing, right? So what would it look like? My question is, what would it look like if we started being more honest with our stories and with learning how to read the room, of course, and of course respect for boundaries, because that's another key factor here. You know, we gotta have respect for other people. You can't be helpful if you are just blowing past people's boundaries. Okay. So what would it look like if we normalize the human condition and really learn to build encouragement within that process? What would it look like if we started encouraging each other? You know, I know that every time, I didn't always do this, but when in the last several years, I had ended up in the hospital so many times and with so many tests that I started feeling like, gosh, I hate doing this to them. Even though I was suffering what I was suffering and it was legitimate, I felt bad that they started to get to know me sometimes. And that's embarrassing. Boy, does that take a hit to your pride. But you know what turned it around? I made a decision one day. And I actually made this decision in the midst of some of the most excruciating pain I have ever been in when being in a hospital. This particular time actually resulted in, after a few more trips, it was for the same situation, after a few more trips to the hospital, they found out I had a major issue that needed surgery. And so in the midst of some of my most severe pain, I made a decision because I saw all these people around me and they're hurting and they're in pain. Some of them are afraid. And I know intimately what that fear and what that pain is like. I may not know their pain. I may not know exactly what's going through their head, but I have an understanding. And I felt so bad for them that in that moment I decided that no matter what pain or situation I was going through, I wanted to make a point to try to encourage the people that were around me, sit with them if they needed someone to sit with them, to, you know, because sometimes it just takes someone sitting with you to help calm you down and take your fears away, because it can feel really lonely. And especially during the time of COVID, like, it was way lonelier when you don't have loved ones that are able to be with you in the midst of your suffering. It is so much scarier. And so on the other end of that, like, I can't tell you how much gratitude and encouragement I saw on these people's faces. Just that little act of that little decision helped my pain feel insignificant to the point I was able to bear it. Not that you should bear all your pain, but you're gonna go through pain. Learn how to cope with it, right? Learn how to cope through it, because it's not going away. It can go away, obviously, for various different reasons, but in the midst of your pain, there are ways to make it somehow okay, and it does help. And I know not every situation that's going to be the case. I mean, you come in with a broken leg and you're screaming in pain. I get it. I have sympathy for people like that. I truly get it. But when you have the ability to make a decision and do something like that, like, give it a shot, because you'd be really surprised at the impact, the positive impact, both to yourself and to those people you're interacting with. On the other flip side, I recognized when you're in that environment so much, the emergency situation, you start to see how people get treated. So the people that are coming in, like, they don't mean to be rude or mean, but there are some people that are in so much pain and they are crappy when they're in pain. I think it's just no different than a baby that's like, I got an upset stomach and they can't speak. They're just going to scream. They're not trying to be rude. They're not trying to be the way they are. It's a reaction. And, you know, and that's a normal reaction. But I would notice that some of these people would be really rude to the staff. You know, the people that are there at amazing hours, working really, really hard, and highly underappreciated for what they do, what they go through, what they experience, the kind of trauma they see every single day. And to be treated in a way that's like, how dare you, I'm in pain. Therefore you serve me, how dare you treat me this way, you know, like, and giving that staff that kind of response And I get it, they don't have the understanding. And that's part of what this is all about. Let's have a real conversation. Let's normalize it a little bit. And let's hopefully build awareness and encouragement to think about things a little deeper. And so likewise, like helping the people that were waiting and suffering, I wanted to help people. I wanted to encourage the staff. I have some family and some friends that are also have worked in the ER field and other various medical, hospital, and care worker fields, and it is hard work. And so I started making a point that even in the midst of my pain, I'd be getting wheeled around for imagery or tests. And I'd be like, they'd say, oh, I'm so sorry if, like they accidentally did something that they thought might have put me off out of a disadvantage or something like that, and nothing serious, just super minor things, like, I'm sorry it's cold, do you need another blanket? It's like, I would make sure that in those opportunities that I would say thank you. I was like, oh no, I'm not good, but I'm okay. Like, thank you for being here. Thank you for being available to help me get these tests that I need, to help me figure out what's going on so that I can get better. I want to thank you for the work that you do, because I recognize you don't always get that appreciation. People are coming in and out with pain and their conditions, and they're not always being grateful for what you do here. So I just want to make sure to say thank you, because I get it, I see you, is kind of the message. And the impact, the gratitude on those people's faces is just, that can really help someone's day. I actually had a nurse one time who had just witnessed someone pass away the day before, and it was really hard for them to tell their family. And they were elderly, it was complications, it was nothing sudden, but it's still really hard, to have to tell their family that that person's gone, and to give them their belongings and whatever else, and I was going through my ordeal that day, and you know what? I still don't even remember exactly what I said, but it was along those lines. And that nurse, he was like, you know what? Thank you. He's like, I really needed that today, because yesterday was a really hard day. And he's like, I love what I do, but it is hard. It weighs on me. And I had a hard time sleeping last night because it broke my heart to have to tell that family that family member was gone. And that nurse actually gave me a hug, because it really helped them process the impact of just process the emotions, be real, be human, sit with them for a moment. And it's amazing that you can do that in the midst of your whatever it is you're suffering. And so now I have this motto that I am the most easygoing, happiest sick person you'll meet. Not because it's easy for me to go through the pain or that it doesn't actively hurt me. It's because I made a choice to be a positive impact. Why? Because that took my pain, my suffering, whatever it is I had been given to me, whatever cards had been dealt to me, and it converted it into powerful currency. And this is just a small example of what I'm talking about. Not everybody's gonna have the same situation, but just the impact it can make to tweak your thinking, your thought process, and the slightest little habits that you do, and learn how to invest whatever it is you're given in life for not just yourself, but for benefiting other people that you interact with. We always hear about the terminology of ripples in a pond, and that is truer than we can even imagine. I like to take this analogy and actually break it down into a slightly different, more visual perspective. I like to think of all of us as we're individual puzzle pieces in this great big puzzle of life, right? So we don't have the ability to step back and see the whole image or look at the image on the box, right? That's not our place. I personally think that that's God's the one seeing all that, right? But for us, we have this specific shape, and on our shape, we might have similar shapes to other puzzle pieces, but we have a different image printed on us. And And I'm not talking predetermination or anything like that. This is just an example of how unique we are as people. Our set of skills, our tools, our gifts, our abilities, what's given to us in our lives, the way our lives unfold. Okay, so that's that image on that puzzle piece. And a lot of times what we find ourselves doing is we try to take ourselves and fit ourselves in the different areas of the puzzle that we think we fit. There's nothing wrong with that. We're learning and discovering, right? Sometimes we get broken edges, bent curves, in the process because we're trying to shove a little too hard. Sometimes we fit, but the picture doesn't make sense. Nothing works when you're sitting in that spot. And it's only when you find the spot that you actually are meant to fit in, that you belong in. And again, not predetermination, because everything in the action of our lives is what determines what's on that puzzle piece of us, right? So when you finally fit that spot that you're meant to belong, all of a sudden the image is clear. The interactions of the puzzle pieces around you make sense. Everything starts to flow. And the crazy thing is that the picture becomes clearer and clearer further and further out. Now you might be sitting here and you can see the first few pieces around you and you can't see the piece all the way over here. But you as a whole with everything actually impact that puzzle piece over there, because it only takes one puzzle piece to be out of place to not make a puzzle to get put together. It's still an undone puzzle, right? And the other point of that is that puzzle piece over here has no business telling you how you fit and function and belong over here, because this isn't their area of expertise. This isn't their area of what was given to them in their life. Their life may have molded and shaped them to be a corner piece, or a piece just way out here on the lower right hand side, right? So it's one of those things you have to really understand, that we are so individual, and yet there is enough crossover and connected parts, so when you have a puzzle piece and you've got your little circle and you've got the end and locks in place, and then you got the other grooves, right? So we are so interconnected in our experiences and our life situations that it's amazing how much we actually can impact each other positively. Because even though my experience with cancer isn't exactly the same as the next person who had cancer, or even to the family member who had a family member with cancer, none of our perspectives are exactly the same. My husband's perspective on our life together is different than mine. Not that we're not aligned, it's just that he's looking through his eyes and I'm looking through mine. And that's what I'm talking about, but we still have a crossover. And so learn to identify start asking yourself what has been given to you, whether you perceive it as bad, hardships, positive good things you're grateful for, successes, or at least things you identify as successes, goals. Look at everything of what you're given. Gifts and talents is another huge part of that, right? Things that drive you internally. And start to look and examine, how could it be used as a form of currency to invest in your life, invest in a way that not only positively impacts yourself, but can impact your neighbor, your friend, the person, the stranger you come across, and some of my most profound impacting moments have happened with people that I've met and only talked to once, and only ever once, in a very short moment of time. And I tell you what, it has forever changed my perspective on this. So I just want to encourage you, you have been given more in your life, in your story, and your story can create goosebumps. So good luck.